Breaking news. According to the Daily Mail, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just a trafficker. He was running Russia's biggest honey trap operation against the West. It is Sunday, February 1st, 2026. And look, this isn't ancient history. The DOJ just dropped a document bomb that completely changes how we view the current war in Ukraine. Before we even get into these files, if you stand with Ukraine and you want the truth about the threats facing Europe, you need to be connected. So, subscribe to Defense Reports. It's your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Ari in the latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we are covering the massive DOJ document release that hit the servers late Friday night. We're talking 3.5 million pages. And these don't just rewrite the tabloids. I mean, they rewrite the national security history of the last 20 years. We always, operated on the assumption that Jeffrey Epstein was just a pervert with some very rich friends. But these new files,
they suggest he was actually a strategic weapon, a honey trap operator, working directly with Russian intelligence to compromise Western leadership.
It completely shifts the entire paradigm. I mean, we're not looking at a sex scandal anymore. We're looking at statecraft. And the cliffhangers in this data dump, they're honestly terrifying for anyone in the defense sector. We found emails setting up meetings between Epstein and Vladimir Putin himself. We have hard evidence of Russian swallows, that's their term for female agents, infiltrating Silicon Valley, facilitated specifically by Epstein.
And the specifics are just brutal. There's an email exchange about getting a, quote, Russian girl for Prince Andrew. Then there are logs showing Epstein literally briefing Russian diplomats on exactly how to handle Donald Trump right before the Helsinki summit.
It connects dots we didn't even know were on the same page. And the implication is just staggering. We've spent years analyzing why there's so much hesitation in the West to fully support Ukraine, or why sanctions seem to have these, intentional backdoors. These files suggest that hesitation might be rooted in decades of compromat blackmail material gathered by this very operation. The Kremlin may have been holding a gun to the head of Western democracy for a generation.
It's the why. It's the why behind all this geopolitical paralysis. So let's look at the what. This release was delayed past the December deadline, right? We were expecting this weeks ago.
Right. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche finally confirmed the release on January 30th, and it is massive. 3 million pages, 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images. The sheer volume tells you this wasn't some kind of side hustle. This was an industrial-scale intelligence-gathering operation. And the Daily Mail, citing intelligence sources, frames this as geopolitical at its core.
Okay, so for listeners who might only know the term from spy movies, let's define honey trap in this specific operational context, because I think people just assume it's about catching someone cheating.
It's so much more calculated than that. A honey trap is the tradecraft of luring targets into intimate or compromising situations specifically to record them. But the goal isn't money. Extortion is for criminals. For intelligence agencies, the currency is influence. The objective here was to gather compromat on Western political, business, and crucially, technological elites. Once the Kremlin has that on file, they can exert pressure on votes, on sanctions enforcement, on the delivery of military aid.
Which brings us right to the war in Ukraine today. If Putin has leverage over the very people deciding whether or not to send long-range missiles or F-16s, that changes the entire battlefield.
Precisely. This whole operation was designed to weaken Western resolve long before the tanks rolled across the border. The fractures we see in the NATO alliance, or the slow walking of aid to Kyiv, these are not accidents. They are likely the result of a long-term intelligence operation that exploits human weakness.
Let's get into the evidence, because there was one smoking gun that it blew my mind. The Igor email. This felt like it showed the hierarchy Epstein was operating in.
Oh, it's critical. We found an email from September 11th, 2011. An associate named Igor is discussing a meeting with Putin scheduled for September 16th. But it goes further. You fast forward to 2014, and there's correspondence with Joy Ito, a Japanese entrepreneur, and LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman. They're discussing a joint trip with Epstein to meet Putin.
A direct meeting with the Russian president. Right. I mean, that puts Epstein on the level of a head of state, diplomatically speaking. But that 2014 meeting was canceled, wasn't it?
It was, and the reason why is just chilling. Joy Toto wrote, and this is a direct quote, "Now, after the plane crash, it seems like a bad idea."
The plane crash, he's talking about MH17. The Malaysia Airlines flight that was shot down by Russian-backed forces over Ukraine.
Yes.
So they were casually planning a meet and greet with Putin while the wreckage of a civilian airliner was still smoldering in a wheat field in Ukraine.
It just proves Epstein wasn't some socialite floating around parties. He was operating in the highest diplomatic circles during active Russian aggression. He was a conduit. And the files show he wasn't just moving billionaires to Russia, he was moving Russian agents into the U.S. And this is where we have to talk about the swallows.
Swallows being the old KGB and now FSB, term for female agents trained in seduction and espionage.
Exactly, and this is where it gets really technical. Epstein wasn't just trafficking for pleasure, he was placing operatives in high-level U.S. industries, specifically tech and AI. Look at the case of Svetlana Pozideva. She went by Lana.
Right, I saw her file in the release. Her education alone is a giant red flag.
It's a flashing siren. She's a graduate of MGMO, the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. In the intelligence world, everyone knows MGMO is the premier recruiting ground for Russian spies and diplomats. You don't just graduate from there and become a model in New York without the state's blessing. And she got an O1 talent visa.
The O1, that's for people with extraordinary ability, right? It's a really high bar. So who vouched for her?
Sergei Bilyakov. At the time, he was a Russian deputy minister, so that's a direct government endorsement for a U.S. visa. And once she was in, Epstein funded her organizations, things like the Open Cog Foundation. He effectively bought her access into the inner circles of American supercomputing and artificial intelligence.
And that's what's so concerning from a defense perspective.
Yeah.
Why AI? Why was Epstein pushing a Russian asset into that one specific sector?
Because Vladimir Putin views AI dominance as essential for regime survival. He has publicly compared AI supremacy to the atomic bomb. So by using Epstein to open doors for agents like Lana, the Kremlin was infiltrating the very infrastructure of future U.S. defense technology. They need that tech to modernize their military, the same military that's threatening all of Europe today.
And it wasn't a one-off either. This Masha Drakova follows the same exact pattern.
Right. She was a former activist for Nashi, the pro-Putin youth movement, which are basically the Kremlin's street enforcers. She moves to Silicon Valley, becomes a venture capitalist with Day One Ventures, and raises $70 million, allegedly backed by wealthy Russians. Epstein was the bridge. He legitimized them. He helped Russian intelligence walk right into Silicon Valley boardrooms.
It's just terrifying to think how deep this goes. We're talking about the people building the technology that runs our entire defense infrastructure. But let's follow the money.
Yeah.
Because intelligence operations on this scale, they aren't cheap. The volume of transfers in those Senate Finance Committee findings is just massive.
Epstein was swimming in cash. The release documents 4,725 transfers totaling $1.1 billion. But it's not the amount, it's the counterparties that tell the story. We're talking about Alpha Bank and Sberbank.
Both of which are heavily sanctioned Russian banks now.
And they were targets back then, too. It looks like Epstein was acting as a financial strategist for the Kremlin. After the 2014 annexation of Crimea, the West tried to cripple Russia's ability to wage war through economic sanctions. Epstein helped oligarchs bypass those firewalls.
Yeah.
By helping Russia evade economic warfare, he was directly undermining European security. He was, in effect, funding the very machinery that is attacking Ukraine today.
So when we see Russian missiles hitting Ukrainian cities, some of the funding for that capability could have moved through these exact channels.
That is the grim reality. He was helping them keep their war chest full. And he had a handler for this financial side, right? This Sergei Bilyakov character. His name just keeps popping up.
Yeah, let's talk about him. He seems to be the nexus point for a lot of this.
Bilyakov was Epstein's main contact. He used the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, people call it the Russian Davos, as a hunting ground. Epstein would recruit Western executives, people like Reid Hoffman or Nathan Myhrvold, to attend. It was a legitimacy laundry. The more Western VIPs who showed up, the more legitimate Putin's regime looked on the world stage.
And what did Epstein get in exchange?
It was a quid pro quo. Bilyakov used Russian state resources to help Epstein solve his problems. There's a specific file on a woman named Guzel Ganeva who was trying to blackmail Epstein's friend, the billionaire Leon Black. Bilyakov gave Epstein a detailed Russian intelligence file on her to shut her down.
That's active collaboration with the Foreign Intelligence Service. I bring you American influence. You use your state spy apparatus to silence my problems.
It's a partnership. And that partnership extended to compromising the absolute peak of the Western elite, which means we have to talk about Prince Andrew and the Duke emails.
This exchange from 2010 is just incredibly blunt. Epstein writes to the prince, I have a friend who I think you might enjoy having dinner with. She's 26, Russian, clever, beautiful, trustworthy.
And Andrew's reply, that would be absolutely lovely.
Trustworthy. That's such a loaded word in that context. You don't need a dinner date to be trustworthy unless you're doing something that requires total silence.
Precisely. It just shows how easily a high-ranking figure from a core NATO country, a British royal, was served up to a potential Russian asset. If compromising material was gathered at that meeting, it creates a vulnerability right at the heart of the British establishment. And you have to remember, Prince Andrew had military affiliations, he was a trade envoy, he was a very high-value target.
And then we have the Trump angle. The emails here are different. They're not about setting Trump up with women, but about Epstein positioning himself as an interpreter of Trump for the Russians.
That's the key distinction. Epstein was coaching the Kremlin. He briefed Vitaly Churkin, who was the Russian UN ambassador, on Trump's psychology. He told him, quote, he must be seen to get something. He was literally writing the playbook on how to manipulate the U.S. president.
He even suggested to Thorbjorn Jagland at the Council of Europe that he should tell Putin to have his foreign minister, Lavrov, talk to Epstein to understand Trump.
And look at the timeline. This is all leading up to the 2018 Helsinki summit. That was the moment Trump stood on stage next to Putin and sided with him over America's own intelligence agencies about election interference. Epstein was offering insight right before that catastrophic diplomatic failure. He was helping Putin press all the right buttons.
There was that email from Larry Summers asking Epstein point blank if the Russians have stuff on Trump.
Epstein's reply was very nuanced. He said it wasn't simple blackmail, but that Trump thought he had personally charmed Putin. But the darker implication comes from a 2011 email to Ghislaine Maxwell. In it, Epstein calls Trump the dog that didn't bark.
That's a classic Sherlock Holmes reference. It's used a lot in intel analysis. What does that imply here?
It implies complicity through silence. The dog didn't bark because it knew the intruder. It suggests Trump knew about the girls, knew about the nature of the whole operation, but he stayed quiet. In intelligence, silence is a commodity. If you know where the bodies are buried and you don't talk, you are an asset. Or at the very least, you're neutralized.
This level of sophistication, it really suggests Epstein didn't just build this machine from scratch. A financier from New York doesn't just wake up one day and know how to run a global honey trap for the FSB.
No, he almost certainly inherited it. And for that, you have to look at the lineage. Ghislaine Maxwell's father was Robert Maxwell. He was a media tycoon, sure, but in the intel community, he was known as a suspected triple agent, working for the KGB, Mossad, and MI6.
So the theory is that Epstein just took over the family business.
That is the leading theory, and it's supported by sources like Ari Ben-Menashe, a former Israeli spy who claims he was the handler for both Maxwells. He argues the goal was always blackmail for intelligence. Epstein didn't stumble into this world. He took over a pre-existing infrastructure designed to compromise Western leaders. The software was already installed. Epstein just became the new operator.
And we are still only seeing half the picture here. The DOJ is still withholding about 50% of the files. Roughly 3 million pages are still under wraps.
Yeah, Democrat Robert Garcia is demanding the full release. But you have to notice the political irony here. The MAGA movement was screaming for these files because they were convinced it would expose a cabal of their enemies. Instead, the files are exposing a massive Russian operation that infiltrated Trump's own inner circle.
And the silence from people like J.D. Vance, who were so vocal about this before, is just deafening. It turns out the call was coming from inside the house.
And that brings us right back to the battlefield today. If we want to understand why Europe and the U.S. struggle to stand united against Russian aggression, we have to look at who was compromised 10 or 20 years ago. The FSB likely holds the master list of everyone Epstein ever recorded.
If you are a politician somewhere in Europe or the U.S., and you know there's a tape of you sitting in an FSB vault, you're going to think twice before voting for that tank shipment to Kiev.
Exactly. That is the very definition of compromat. It doesn't mean you're a paid agent. It means you are paralyzed. The Kremlin's honey trap was a long-term investment, and they are cashing in those dividends right now, today, on the front lines of Ukraine. Every delay in aid, every hesitation to enforce sanctions, we have to ask if that is policy or if it is just self-preservation by compromised individuals.
It is a terrifying reality check. This whole scandal isn't about a private island anymore. It's about the systemic infiltration of Western security architecture, and it explains so much of the chaos we're seeing.
It forces us to question everything. The enemy isn't just on the other side of the trench. They've been in our boardrooms and our social circles for decades.
And that's the question we really need to leave you with. If the FSB has the list, who is on it that we don't know about yet? And how is that shaping the war in Ukraine right this second?
This has been a heavy deep dive, but a necessary one. We have to understand the battlefield isn't just in the trenches. It's in the files, the servers, and the secrets held by our adversaries. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. If you believe in a strong defense and in standing with our allies in Ukraine, hit that button. Subscribe to Defense Reports. It's your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.